The winter of 1939 was unlike anything Europe had seen in a generation. Temperatures in Finland plunged below -40 degrees Celsius. Forests froze into silent labyrinths of white, and the sun barely rose above the horizon. Into this frozen world marched one of the most feared forces of the age, the Soviet Red Army, backed by SS-trained advisors and special detachments. They expected a swift victory. They expected a nation to crumble. What they met instead was a ghost. His name was Simo Häyhä, a quiet 5'3" farmer from a small village called Rautjärvi. He owned no medals, had no military lineage, and spoke so little that the men in his unit joked he barely existed. But when war erupted between Finland and the Soviet Union, Simo quietly picked up his old bolt-action rifle, a simple iron-sight Mosin Nagant M28, and walked into the woods. No scope, no glamour, no myths yet written. Just one man, a white hood, and a skill almost supernatural. By December, Soviet commanders began receiving disturbing reports. Patrols sent into the forests never returned. Columns were ambushed so precisely that not a single soldier survived to describe what happened. Machine gun nests were wiped out with a single shot. Officers died the moment they stepped into the open. The Soviets thought it was an entire Finnish sniper unit. It wasn't. It was Simo. Alone. He moved like an animal of the snow, studying wind patterns, memorizing tree lines, and vanishing before the enemy even understood where the bullet had come from. To keep his breath from revealing him, he placed snow in his mouth. To prevent his rifle from freezing, he slept with it under his coat. And to stabilize his shots, he built small snow mounds that absorbed recoil, something no manual taught, but instinct perfected. Soon, a terrifying pattern emerged. Every time Soviet troops attempted to advance, the first man to fall was always the officer. The second was the radio operator. The third was anyone who tried to drag the bodies to safety. Commanders were furious. The rank and file were terrified. Entire attack waves stalled because no one dared lift their head from the snow. The Soviets deployed counter-sniper teams, many trained under German SS doctrine during joint maneuvers before the war. They searched for the Finnish phantom who killed with inhuman precision. Every one of them died. By late winter, Simo Häyhä had more than 150 confirmed kills, nearly all against elite infantry and SS-guided detachments. Yet he refused promotion, refused a scope, and refused to speak about his growing reputation. In letters home, he never bragged. He simply wrote, "I did what I was trained to do." But what he did was far more than any army expected from one man. Soviet morale fractured wherever whispers of the invisible sniper spread. Soldiers spoke of him the way one speaks of a curse. The White Death, they called him, because he blended so perfectly with the snow that even when they stared directly at him, they saw nothing. By early 1940, Soviet intelligence concluded something astonishing. A single Finnish sniper was responsible for halting multiple battalion-level advances in the Kollaa region. One man had stopped hundreds. One man had turned the forest into a killing ground where Soviet SS-trained reconnaissance units refused to operate. And still, Simo remained emotionless, disciplined, unshakable. As the war dragged on, his legend would only grow, as would the Soviet obsession to end him. Because deep in the forest of Finland, the Red Army had met an enemy unlike any they had ever seen. And this was only the beginning. By January 1940, the Soviet front at Kollaa had become a graveyard. Every ridge, every frozen pine tree, every drift of snow concealed the work of a single man whose presence could not be seen but whose impact could not be denied. Soviet commanders refused to believe the reports. How could one Finnish farmer be responsible for so many losses? But the bodies told the truth. Every morning, fresh casualties were dragged out of the woods, each with the same tiny, perfect entry wound just below the helmet line. No splatter, no panic, just one precise shot, every time. Officers stopped wearing rank insignia. Scouts crawled instead of walked. Radio operators refused to stand near windows. Fear spread faster than frostbite. This was the moment the Soviets escalated. They called in elite counter-sniper units, men trained under doctrines exchanged during the pre-war cooperation between Germany and the USSR. Many of these snipers had served alongside SS instructors and were regarded as the most technically advanced marksmen the Red Army possessed. Their mission: find the ghost, kill the ghost. They arrived with high magnification scopes, specially tuned rifles, and full winter camouflage. On paper, they were superior to the Finnish defenders' better gear. More numbers, more firepower. But none of that mattered in the forests of Kollaa. The first counter-sniper team set up carefully, choosing a vantage point overlooking a known Finnish patrol route. They waited silently for hours, breath freezing in tiny crystals, and then, without warning, a single shot cracked across the tree line. Their spotter fell dead instantly. The sniper tried to escape, crawling backwards through the snow, but another shot followed him like a predator tracking prey. 2 bullets, 2 kills, no trace of where they had come from. The team never even saw their attacker. It happened again, and again. Every time a new group of snipers deployed, someone died before they even touched their rifles. One Soviet report described it plainly. "We are being hunted." Frustrated and humiliated, Soviet commanders escalated the mission yet again. They deployed artillery, not at Finnish positions, but at any area where Simo might be hiding. Entire forest sections were shelled blindly, reduced to splintered sticks. It didn't matter, Simo moved long before the shells landed. They tried flamethrower squads, sweeping through the woods to flush him out. He shot the operators one by one. They tried recon teams with dogs. Simo ambushed them from downwind. They tried decoys, fake soldiers made of logs and helmets. Each decoy was hit dead center before they even finished placing them. By now, Soviet intelligence believed they were facing a full Finnish sniper company. But across the front, Finnish officers kept correcting them. "It's just Hayha." Morale shattered even further. Soviet troops began refusing to advance through wooded areas unless artillery had flattened them first. When intelligence maps displayed the sectors where the mysterious sniper operated, regiments expressed open fear. Some troops whispered superstitions. He could see in the dark. He never slept. He could hear your heartbeat in the snow. It didn't help that Simo often positioned himself for 15+ hours at a time, motionless in temperatures that killed men in minutes. When the Red Army looked into the tree line, they saw nothing. No muzzle flash, no glint, no movement. Simo even packed snow over his rifle to prevent any puff of steam. The Soviets had superior manpower. They had scopes, they had technology, but Simo had nature itself. He understood the forest like a second skin. He understood how snow moved, how wind carried sound, how light bent through the trees. His instinct was so sharp that he often sensed incoming danger without ever seeing it. Still, the Soviets refused to give up. This was no longer a tactical objective. It was personal. Units boasting SS-style elite training felt humiliated. Newspapers back home demanded progress. Officers knew their reputations were collapsing, so they launched a final strategy: directly track the sniper through his kills. Follow each shot, predict his next position, corner him with overwhelming force. But Simo Häyhä was always one move ahead. As February approached, the Soviets would make their most aggressive attempt yet, sending dozens of men into a coordinated sweep meant to trap him between converging units. They did not realize they were walking straight into the deadliest ambush the White Death had ever prepared. By late February 1940, Soviet frustration at Kollaa had reached a boiling point. Their intelligence officers, now convinced that Simo Häyhä was not a ghost, but a lone sharpshooter who had mastered the terrain, proposed a plan designed not just to eliminate him, but to crush the Finnish resistance in one decisive blow. A full SS-trained infantry battalion, reinforced with machine gun teams and accompanied by specialized reconnaissance units, would sweep the forest in a coordinated pincer movement. They would flood the woods with overwhelming manpower, push Simo toward a kill zone, and drown him under sheer numbers. Confidence was high. No lone sniper, no matter how skilled, could stand against an organized battalion-level sweep. Before dawn, hundreds of Soviet boots moved silently through the snow, fanning out in broad arcs while dogs, scouts, and machine gun detachments followed close behind. But the forest does not care about numbers. It cares about silence, patience, and instinct. And in those three things, Simo Häyhä was unmatched. From the moment he sensed the unnatural hush in the woods, the faint crunch of snow that didn't belong, he understood exactly what was coming. He retreated deeper into the forest, finding a ridge with a narrow funnel of terrain, the perfect choke point. There he prepared the deadliest trap of his career, firing positions dug low into the snow, escape routes softened for silent movement, and overlapping fields of fire only he could navigate. When the Soviets advanced, they walked straight into the crosshairs of a man who had spent his whole life hunting in these woods. The first shot tore through an officer at the front line, stopping the entire column. Confusion swept the ranks. No muzzle flash, no visible enemy, no sign of where death had come from. Within seconds, a second and third shot dropped the lead scouts. Panic rippled as Soviet troops scrambled for cover, but the snow betrayed them. Every movement left a dark smear against the white Simo worked his bolt with mechanical calm, firing, shifting position, firing again, slipping through the snow like a shadow. The battalion's formation dissolved into chaos. Machine gun teams attempted to set up suppressive fire, but each gunner fell before the tripod even touched the ground. Officers screamed orders that were swallowed by the wind. Ammunition runners sprinted between trees, only to collapse mid-stride. In less than 30 minutes, the battalion's coordinated sweep had turned into a slaughter. By the time the Soviets realized they were being herded in circles, half their forward elements were down, their flanks collapsing, and their morale shattered. They had tried to trap the White Death, only to discover he had trapped them first. The destruction of the battalion sent shockwaves through Soviet command. Never before had an entire coordinated sweep collapsed under the fire of a single sniper, and the humiliation spread fast. Reports arriving at headquarters insisted the Finns must have deployed dozens of hidden marksmen, but captured diaries, radio intercepts, and battlefield forensics all pointed to the same impossible truth. One man had done this. Determined to end the nightmare, Soviet commanders summoned additional artillery units to the Kollaa front, along with anti-sniper specialists armed with telescopic rifles, spotter scopes, and incendiary rounds. Their strategy shifted away from precision sweeps and instead embraced overwhelming firepower. Flatten the forest, kill everything that moved, and hope the White Death lay somewhere beneath the smoldering snow. On March 6th, the Soviets launched the largest bombardment the sector had seen. Barrages thundered across the tree line, trees snapped like matchsticks, and whole ridges disintegrated under the rain of shells. For hours, the forest burned. Yet when the shelling stopped and patrols advanced, the first man to step into the open dropped instantly from a single, precise bullet. Simo Häyhä was still alive, still watching, still unbroken. But even he knew that the Soviets were closing in. Their artillery bombardments were becoming more accurate, their counter-snipers more disciplined, and the number of troops sweeping the woods grew each day. For the first time, Simo felt the pressure tightening around him. Not fear, but recognition that the enemy had finally begun to learn. By mid-afternoon on March 6th, the Soviet counter-snipers launched their boldest attempt yet. They established overlapping firing positions, used smoke to cover their movement, and sent infantry forward to bait Simo into revealing his location. Hayha responded as he always did, silently, methodically, choosing only the shots that mattered. But as he shifted positions through the shattered trees, scanning the ridgeline through swirling smoke, a single Soviet marksman spotted the faintest sliver of movement, a silhouette rising briefly above a snowbank. The enemy sniper fired an explosive round, designed specifically for anti-personnel use, and the bullet struck Simo in the left side of the face. The impact was catastrophic. His jaw shattered instantly, teeth blown out, skin torn open. He collapsed into the snow unconscious, face mangled beyond recognition. When Finnish soldiers found him hours later, they assumed he was dead until they saw a faint trail of breath rising into the frozen air. Hayha was dragged from the battlefield, barely clinging to life. The man the Soviets had hunted for months had finally fallen, and word spread quickly through Red Army ranks. The White Death was no more, but they were wrong. Despite his horrific wound, despite the odds, despite weeks of unconsciousness and a face permanently altered by the explosion, Simo Häyhä survived. And although he would never return to the battlefield, his legend would grow even greater in the years that followed. The Soviets had finally hit him, but they had never broken him. When Simo Häyhä awoke weeks later in a field hospital, he no longer resembled the man who had walked into the Kollaa forests months before his jaw was shattered in multiple places, his cheek torn apart, and his sense of time completely erased. He had slipped in and out of consciousness while surgeons worked tirelessly to rebuild what the explosive bullet had destroyed. On March 13th, the day he finally opened his eyes, the room was silent. Nurses watched him as if they were witnessing a miracle. The Winter War had ended. That very morning, Finland had signed peace with the Soviet Union, drawing a brutal conflict to a close. To those who stood at his bedside, it felt symbolic, almost poetic, that the most feared sniper of the war had returned to life at the exact moment the guns fell silent. His commanders visited him often, not to celebrate what he had done, but to acknowledge the impossible truth. One man had held entire Soviet battalions at bay, slowed enemy advances, shattered morale, and inflicted such psychological damage that even artillery strikes were launched simply to quiet the fear of his presence. And yet Simo remained humble, speaking little as always, shrugging off praise with the same quiet dignity he carried into battle. Asked once how he had managed to stay alive in conditions where most men froze or panicked, he answered only, training and keeping calm. But those who knew him understood. It was instinct, discipline, and a mind built for absolute focus. The Soviets never captured him, never broke him, and never understood him. As he healed, Simo was offered various honors and medals, but he cared for none of it. He returned eventually to the countryside, living a simple life as a hunter and dog breeder, as though the war had been only a distant chapter rather than the defining crucible that forged one of history's most extraordinary soldiers. He spoke rarely of his kills, never glorifying his role or feeding into the legend that had grown around him. To him, war was not a story, it was necessity. He carried the same steady calm into his later years, walking the forests quietly, his restored jaw stiff but functional, his body marked by a wound that should have ended him. Yet he lived to the age of 96, long enough to see historians confirm more than 500 confirmed kills, making him the deadliest sniper in any war, long enough to witness soldiers, researchers, and filmmakers travel across the world to meet the small Finnish man who had terrified entire divisions, and long enough to understand what even the Soviets eventually admitted. The White Death had become a symbol of resistance, of precision, of the raw, unforgiving will to survive. He never sought fame, never embraced his notoriety, and never claimed to be more than a farmer who did his duty. But the forests of Kollaa remember, the soldiers who faced him remembered, and military history carved his name into stone as a figure so improbable, so unstoppable, that even a bullet designed to kill him could only alter his face, not the legacy that would outlive every man who ever hunted him. In the decades after the Winter War, Simo Häyhä slipped back into the life he had always known, quiet, rural, unadorned. Yet the legend he left behind refused to fade. Military academies across the world studied his tactics, marveling at how a man armed with a simple, unscoped rifle could outmatch entire battalions and elite counter-sniper units. Historians traced his movements across the snowy ravines of Kollaa, trying to understand how he anticipated Soviet behavior so flawlessly, how he positioned himself for hours without betraying the slightest flicker of motion, and how he mastered instinctive range-finding without modern tools. In an age obsessed with technology, Simo's story became a reminder that the deadliest weapon on any battlefield is a disciplined mind. Even the Soviet officers who once hunted him spoke later with a mix of fear and admiration, acknowledging that one man's presence had halted advances, fractured morale, and forced tactical changes across an entire front. His mythos grew not through self-promotion. He avoided interviews and resisted any attempt to dramatize his past, but through the simple power of the truth, that a modest, soft-spoken farmer had become one of the most effective soldiers in modern history. Veterans who had served alongside him remembered not his kill count, but his steadiness, the way he listened more than he spoke, the way he treated every task with precision, the way he carried himself like a man who understood nature in a way others never could. As the years passed, Simo met generations of Finnish soldiers who traveled to his home seeking advice, mentorship, or simply the chance to shake the hand of a legend. He offered them no speeches, no grand strategies, only the same principles he had lived by: practice, patience, and the ability to stay calm when others break. When he died in 2002 at the age of 96, Finland mourned him not just as a war hero, but as a symbol of their national resilience, a man who embodied the belief that courage is not noise, but quiet resolve in the face of the impossible. Today, across museums, military training programs, and documentary archives, Simo Häyhä is remembered as the deadliest sniper in recorded history, but his legacy is more profound than numbers. He showed that a single individual, guided by skill and conviction, can reshape the course of battles and bend entire armies to caution and fear. His nickname, the White Death, remains etched into the story of World War II, not as a figure of brutality, but as a testament to the power of human will. And though the forests of Kollaa have grown silent, buried beneath decades of snow, the legend of the man who once hunted among them remains unmistakably alive.